you recording already?
Yeah, I guess so. I
Oh.
don't remember pressing record, but yeah, I guess it's.
Oh, okay.
Oh, okay.
It's recording already.
Nice.
All right, guys. You
Oh, you're gonna introduce me?
I guess audience now knows a bit about memes or something. We're gonna cut this out, right?
No, this stays.
Yeah.
We don't cut
Okay.
anything out.
Oh, you don't cut anything out, really?
Sometimes we do.
Okay.
Say all the swear words you want.
All right.
Billy, thank you for being here. And
Thanks for having me.
of course, yeah, we met just a couple months ago
Yeah.
at the Bahá'í temple.
Yeah, the Bahá'í House of Worship in Wilmette. For the audience who doesn't know, there is a Bahá'í temple in Wilmette which is like a small town in the north of Chicago, and it's it's incredibly beautiful. I saw it for the first time. I went to it the first time like a couple months ago to volunteer there, and it's just it's incredible. So if you ever get the chance to visit, that would be really nice. But it's actually this temple is actually like the oldest Bahá'í temple that is still standing even. So it's it's very special to the Baha'is, and it's it's an incredible place.
Well,
So yeah, I'm glad you guys came. I'm glad I met you guys.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. Yeah, no, it was a great time that day when my buddy Rob and I when we went there. And well, let's start there because I have a lot of questions about yourself. But what is the Baha'i faith?
Yeah,
Or
so
Baha'ism.
the Baha'i faith it's a religion. It's an independent world religion that is, it was founded about 180 years ago, I believe. And it was founded by Baha'u'llah, who is he is the prophet founder of the Baha'i faith, and he lived in Persia, although throughout his life he was exiled and imprisoned several times, and eventually made his way all the way to Akka in Palestine, which is now Israel. And he taught, he revealed many writings, and the basic three core principles of the Baha'i faith is the idea that there is one God who is, unknowable in his essence, but we only know him by his attributes, the all-loving, the all-seeing, the all-perceiving, that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
And the second core principle is the idea that from time to time he sends out messengers that will educate humanity over time. So, for example, you have Krishna, you have Buddha, you have Jesus, Muhammad, Abraham, Moses. These luminous beings, these divine educators, will come from time to time and educate humanity about spiritual reality and precede a spiritual civilization, which maybe in past ages was relatively small, but with Christianity and Islam was much larger, with the Christian Golden Age and the Islamic Golden Age. And Baha'u'llah is the latest of such messengers from God. And so these these messengers, I like to think of them, they're a bit like school teachers for humanity.
Sure.
Like, you could say like Abraham is like a first grade teacher, and then Moses is like a second grade teacher, and then you go on and on and on until Baha'u'llah, who's like the latest teacher in this school that humanity is collectively going through. So their teachings are a little bit different from time to time. The underlying teachings are still the same. The underlying spiritual teachings about spiritual qualities, love thy neighbor, those kinds of things. Maybe some of the individual laws are a bit different too. Another way I like to think about them is like that they're like that God is like this physician. So humanity at different times has different ills and has different problems. And so, God, the all-knowing physician, will basically prescribe the remedy in the form of specific laws and ordinances for the time. So that's why religions will also have different laws, different prayer habits, and, different periods of fasting, those kinds of things.
Yeah.
But ultimately, they all still stem from the same source. And so the third principle that the Baha'i faith, I would say, is built on, and this is kind of like the pivotal quality of the Baha'i faith, I would say, is the idea of the unity of all people, and that is an objective that we should reach in this day and age. So Baha'u'llah says that now is the time that all people from all over the world are capable, that humanity is mature enough, we've advanced through this school, and that now we are ready to learn how to unite together. And Baha'u'llah's teachings kind of contain like spiritual prerequisites for world peace. The idea that all human beings are from one human family. I think probably the single most famous quote of the Baha'i writings is, "The earth is but one country and mankind its citizens." Or "Ye are the fruits of one tree and the leaves of one branch." So, it's like we all come from these different branches, but ultimately we're one human family.
So my understanding from that is that, and just on the readings that I've done, is that they do Baha'is.
Baha'is, yeah.
Baha'is.
Yeah, Baha'is.
I'm doing this bad.
It's it's fine. Different cultures will pronounce it differently. I think like if you talk to like a Persian, many of the oldest Baha'i families are like Persian. They'll pronounce it as Baha'is, or like.
Okay, so I'm not
so
really
it doesn't matter so much if you say, like, I say Baha'is because I'm I speak mostly English.
Because I put it into Google, the pronunciation. And then it gave me that, and I was like, I don't know if that's what everybody's pronouncing.
Yeah. You see, like,
and before we were recording, you actually corrected how I was saying Baha'u'llah.
You like, there's the apostrophe over the A, so that means that it's like a longer A. And in like Persian, you have like two A's. One of them is like A, and one is like O. So like super different from each other,
So how do you say it?
It's like Baha or something like that. Bahá'í, But I just say Baha'i. It's fine,
Okay. Baha'is, they engage in a lot of social activities, like a lot of social work, community outreach. So they're like engaging in a lot of like these these social issues, right?
I mean, yeah. It's actually like, in like the past, I would say 20 to 30 years or so, the Baha'i faith has kind of grown to the size, and you might say like, oh, a religion that started 180 years ago in Persia, it's like, it's probably not that big today, but actually it's like on every it's like there are Baha'is in like every country and territory in the world. There's millions of people. There were systematic efforts to introduce it to as many populations as possible, because many like early Baha'is from like the 1950s and even like much earlier, they really believed in this idea of like, this religion is for everyone. It's not just for like, for the people of Persia or for the people of like America, which is, a place where the faith was also introduced to pretty early. Which is why the oldest Baha'i temple that is still standing is in Chicago. But, many of them were like, we need to have, for example, Native Americans, indigenous people from regions also need to embrace this religion as their own. So, early on, the main focus of the faith was just like, spreading it around the world, building up like administrative systems just so that the faith can kind of govern itself in different countries, and just like, expanding the reach of the faith so that it can encompass the globe, and so that there's Baha'i communities in as many places as possible. Now that, we've grown so much, we're kind of entering this new stage where the Baha'is are really focusing on just, community building activities, and eventually bringing about this, it starts small. It's just like grassroots efforts, working with communities, trying to unite different peoples, and trying to help them think more about their spiritual development. And, this is not just like Baha'is working, but also people from, all over the community working together. These efforts, have really begun very, very recently. And so it's very exciting to see this happen all over the world. We have like materials, we have like, study materials, Ruhi materials, study circles, which basically is this almost curriculum that we've developed to just, help people
Yeah.
go on like a spiritual path of service, essentially.
Yeah. So you said that it's about 180 years old or something like that.
Yeah.
But would it be fair to say that, according to Baha'is,
Mhm.
it's actually much older because it's just an extension of Christianity, Islam, or Islam, Christianity, and Judaism.
I mean, yeah, you could say that. I think that the way that I talk about it is obviously about the development of, there's actually
The
a
current
number of
age.
things about the Baha'i faith I think that make it very different from, like, other religions. Obviously other religions are, very great in their own way,
Right.
but Baha'u'llah's very very specific teachings. How do I say this? For one thing, he talks about the idea that, like, now is the time for world peace, and now is the time to build it. And the Baha'i faith is also just like a single unified body. And in the writings, Baha'u'llah promises that, like, the Baha'i faith will remain united forever. It won't split up into different sects or anything. And throughout Baha'i history, we've seen people try and fail, actually. And so there's also this idea that now humanity is mature enough that we can basically have this single religion that is, united together and doesn't split up into little factions or sects or anything.
Yeah.
So, it's just, it's like a new, it's just like making religion kind of anew again. Religion in many places is, in decline. People do all kinds of unspeakable things in the name of religion. So in my head, I sometimes do think of the Baha'i faith as like a distinct entity, but it is also like just another chapter unfolding in the history of religion.
Yeah.
So yeah, you're right.
So what is Baha'u'llah's like core teachings? Like, what made him so so attractive to so many people?
I mean, I think that a lot of the spiritual teachings are, very, very similar to many prophets of the past.
Mm-hmm.
There's one writing from the writings of Baha'u'llah. There's one passage from the writings of Baha'u'llah I remember that I found really significant when I read it, which is that, like, he wants to build a civilization such that if you imagine like a woman, or like a really, really pretty, attractive woman who's like wearing lots and lots of jewelry or something like that, if this woman were to travel the world all alone and unprotected or anything through all the countries of the world, just all by herself, not a single man would try to, attack her in any way or try to do anything to harm her or anything like that.
Yeah.
Which is just, absolutely insane, right? Like, how, like, that's almost even impossible to imagine. Like,
Yeah.
you imagine even going through like relatively developed countries today, and even then it's like, I'm not so sure you should be doing this, you know what I mean?
Right.
People talk about like safety all the time, but Baha'u'llah's, some of the, so, if you look at many of the spiritual teachings, like, don't backbite, don't, like, talk about the faults of other people all the time and focus on their good, also talking about justice and, talking about just bettering yourself and bettering the world around you and doing service. A lot of these teachings are very, very similar to other religions. I don't like to focus too much on differences with other religions in terms of the teachings.
Okay. Sure.
But yeah, so what Baha'u'llah brings is basically, like a kind of, spiritual teachings that are required for just a new world order. In the most holy book, Baha'u'llah's Book of Laws, I think the most famous paragraph from there is something like, the world's equilibrium hath been upset through the vibrating influence of this new world order. So there's this idea that, and then it says, mankind's ordered life has been revolutionized through the agency of this new system, the like of which mortal eyes have never witnessed. Something like that. I'm slightly paraphrasing it, but, he's saying that now, the way that people were in olden times, these have to change. That, maybe systems that existed for very, very long, like, people were able to unite among like cities or among nations, and even earlier it was only tribes or families, and in that particular age that was fine. But now he says we all need to unite together.
Yeah.
And, because we haven't done that yet, you see all the atrocities in the world. You see, like, all the wars that are going on. And so, a lot of this is because of this, the coming of this new world order in a way.
Yeah.
Some other teachings of Baha'u'llah that are really significant are the equality of women and men, which no prophet, no messenger has ever said. They've never said that women and men are now equal, and that, so this is, a brand new teaching. Another one is, just the idea of, like, just getting rid of all prejudice for good,
Well, earlier, that's what I was mentioning about the Baha'is. They're really engaged in social work, because you see them in, like, a lot of, like, equality-driven projects.
Yeah.
In terms of race and sex. And you said earlier too that you do well, that's what you've been doing in Chicago. So I want to get into you a little bit, because you're not from Chicago or even the U.S.
No, I'm not.
Where are you from?
I get asked this a lot, so I've said this over and over again to a lot of people, but my
One more
mom is
time.
from the Netherlands. My dad is from the UK, so I'm half Dutch, half British, but I grew up in Israel. I think I said earlier that Baha'u'llah, he originally lived in Persia, but he was eventually banished to Palestine,
Yeah.
to the city of Akka, which was a prison city, like a penal colony for the Ottoman Empire. And they hoped that, like, if they banished him all the way there, far from his base of followers in Persia, modern-day Iran, that the religion would kind of die out that way. But what happened instead was that by bringing him to Akka and to the twin cities of Haifa and Akka, he had finally arrived at what would later become the spiritual and administrative center of the Baha'i faith. So, as a kid, I had the bounty of, growing up by the Baha'i World Center.
So you grew up around Baha'i?
I grew up around, quite a few Baha'is.
Were you raised as one?
I was also raised as a Baha'i, yeah, because my parents, they were serving at the Baha'i World Center. So that's why, even though I'm not Israeli or anything, I grew up there, because my parents, they moved there.
Yeah.
My family is still there. And the Baha'i World Center, it's really interesting, because the Baha'i faith is this, like, world-encompassing religion. There's people from so many countries that come to serve there for different periods of time. So I was, very lucky to meet, like, a lot of people from many different backgrounds who were there. And, it's the shrines. The shrine of Baha'u'llah is, in Akka. And there's also a shrine of the Bab. We haven't talked about the Bab, but the Bab is basically another prophet who came just before Baha'u'llah, kind of. And he was, like, basically preparing the way for Baha'u'llah. So, like, there's this idea that, this is a momentous new teaching, the idea of, a new world order and a new, new system for humanity. And basically the idea is that Baha'u'llah's teachings are so momentous that he had to have another prophet come before him to announce the coming of him. So
it's kind of like John the Baptist.
Yeah, like
and Jesus.
similar to John the Baptist and Jesus, except the Bab is also regarded as a prophet, as a messenger in his own right. And he was, he declared his mission in 1844, which I kind of consider the start of the Baha'i faith, even though Baha'u'llah hadn't yet declared himself until later.
Right.
But he gained many, many hundreds of thousands of followers. Many of them were killed, and he himself was executed, and his remains were brought all the way to Haifa eventually over the course of, like, 60 years in secret, because, there was a lot of religious persecution going on for the Baha'is. And they were brought all the way to Haifa. So now Baha'u'llah is buried in Akka and the Bab is buried in Haifa. Aside from there, so that makes it the spiritual center of the Baha'i faith, these two cities. There's also, like, administrative buildings where the, Baha'i administrative offices are there. The governing body, the Universal House of Justice, is also there.
So
the Universal House, sorry.
No. So the Bab would preach a coming
Basically,
savior, and Baha'u'llah, it took him and correct me if I'm wrong, but it took him a while for him to realize that he was the chosen one until he was in prison and he started to receive these visions.
Yeah,
A
exactly.
young woman, a young like celestial woman appeared to him and was telling him that he is the chosen.
I don't know about young, but you're right. Yeah.
I think in the book that I was reading, it mentioned that it was like a
the
young
maid of
female.
heaven came to him.
Yeah.
And I was like, yeah. I'm not sure if he was like unaware and then he was made aware, but like, I think he probably already. I think when they grow up, they still kind of know that they're like a prophet, but maybe they don't know the nature of their mission yet. They're not given that
yeah,
yet.
it seemed like he had inklings because when he
Yeah.
was young, he was like the
didn't
elders
need
would come
school.
to him
Yeah.
for help, and he was just a kid.
Yeah, exactly. So, he received his revelation when he was in prison. He was in prison for being a follower of the Bab and being a Babi leader.
Mm-hmm.
And it wasn't until long after he was exiled that he declared himself as the one that the Bab had foretold, essentially. He waited a little bit until, the right moment for that. Yeah. We were talking about Haifa, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, yeah, Haifa is honestly, it's like so beautiful in so many ways. The Baha'i gardens there I genuinely don't know if there are any other gardens in the world that are as beautiful as over there. It's so amazing. You can see pictures, but even like that's not the same as just being there.
Yeah.
And the spirit there is so amazing. There's so many people from so many places.
Mm-hmm.
It's I'll never forget the experience of just being there around all these other people.
It's like artwork and architecture is really important in Baha'i faith. I mean, I feel like it creates like a fluidity.
Yeah,
within
there's
the religion.
there's this I think this is probably true for a lot of religions, this idea of like beauty and religious architecture.
Sure, yeah.
Very fascinating subject. And so it not that many Baha'i buildings have been built yet, so it's not like there's like a definitive distinct Baha'i architecture that's emerged yet, or a Baha'i style of architecture.
But all the ones that are around like have a very unique style. And
Yeah.
they're like known
If
for
you-
their beauty.
Yeah, if you've seen like the temple in India or the one in Santiago,
Mhm.
Chile, they're just like they almost don't even look like temples anymore. They look like
Yeah.
these modern buildings, and they're incredible, honestly.
Rob, which is the one that we because remember we saw a bunch of pictures of them at the temple. Which is the one that we were saying like, oh man, that's really not the one obviously not the one in Chicago. Oh, I think
The lotus-shaped one.
Yeah, it was a lotus.
Yeah, that one.
Yeah. Yeah, you're right.
I really want to visit that one someday. It's incredible. It was
Yeah.
probably the single most famous Baha'i building out there. Basically, everyone in India has heard of it. It's incredible.
Have you been to any others?
I've been to the one in Germany, the Baha'i temple in Germany, and I've been to the one in Uganda as well.
Oh,
believe it or
okay.
not. Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah, and both of those are also really, really nice. The one in Germany has like a bunch of like these like diamond-shaped windows that go all the way up to the dome.
Yeah.
And then the one in Uganda is like really beautiful. It's like green and orange colored, so it's very colorful. Most of
Yeah.
them are kind of like white colored, but that one is very colorful. It has like turquoise. It's really nice.
Yeah, but they don't beat the one in Chicago.
Well, it's they're each beautiful in their own way, but whichever temple you happen to be at
Yeah.
feels like the most beautiful. So
Yeah.
So
Chicagoans were probably isn't it true that they were some of the first followers of Baha'u'llah in the US, I mean?
in the West, yeah,
In the
yeah,
West,
yeah. The one of the first Baha'i communities was formed around here, and so back when the Baha'i community was extremely small, they already they asked Abdul Baha, the son of Baha'u'llah, who became the prophet founder, not the prophet founder. Oh my God, he became the successor of Baha'u'llah,
Sure,
because
yeah.
Baha'u'llah, said that you should follow him, and so he eventually granted them permission to build this temple. And because they were such a small community, it took them some 50 years to build it.
Yeah.
They originally asked to build it in 1903, and it wasn't until 1953 that the temple opened. So it took a very, very long time to build.
I mean, for how it looks,
Um,
it was worth it. you
Yeah,
know?
yeah.
Like,
It's the fruit of a lot of labor of a very small community.
We have the cornerstone, right? The cornerstone.
Yeah, the
inside
cornerstone.
yeah.
This Abdul Baha himself, he visited the temple, which also makes this temple very special because no other Baha'i house of worship around the world has this bounty of having the son of Baha'u'llah actually having visited the temple. So having like visited the site of the temple, it was before it was built in 1912, and in a ceremony he laid the cornerstone, and he said the temple is already built because he was seeing like the spirit of unity around the people, and it seemed to him that he thought that the physical aspect of the temple, the physical structure, wasn't the main aspect of the temple that was important. It was the spiritual influence on the people, bringing them together, having them united and joyful and doing service. That was more important to him. The idea that not the temple is beautiful, sure, but unless it inspires people to serve, unless it unless it brings people together, it unites people, then there's not much of a point to it.
And you mentioned his son Abdul
Baha.
Baha.
Yeah.
He was the successor of his father and carried on the teachings.
Exactly. Yeah.
Of Baha'ism.
He was. Yeah. This is another thing which is new to the Baha'i faith. This is honestly, in my opinion, a very fascinating topic about the Baha'i faith that we could talk about for hours. But never before in the history of religion has a prophet declared in writing who his successor is. And so that was another thing that, it's not necessarily a mistake that Jesus and Muhammad didn't do this. It was more maybe a recognition that their followers weren't mature enough to actually be able to stay united under a single person or a single organization. And Baha'u'llah also, he in his writings, he talks about a supreme governing body, the Universal House of Justice, which is a 9-member body, an elected body by the body of believers, that would govern the faith eventually, and that has now been established. So, we still have like an authorized leader by the Prophet himself, which is again something that's very, very special to the Baha'i faith, which now also resides in Haifa.
And then it was Baha'u'llah's grandson, right? That became
Abdul Baha's grandson, Shoghi Effendi, who also became the head of the Baha'i faith from 1921 until 1957. And then after his death, they elected the Universal House of Justice.
Shoghi Effendi.
Shoghi Effendi, exactly.
Yeah. But his son Abdul Baha, like he contributed so much. I mean, he's the one that really brought the Baha'i faith to the Western world.
Yeah, exactly. It was under him that he did so much. He the Baha'i faith was brought to the Western world. He even traveled to the West himself as a pretty old man himself, but he spent 239 days, I believe, in America, and almost every day he was like at a city and he was giving talks about like unity of like different races and the idea of like, the need of a spiritual civilization. Like you need to advance materially, but also advance spiritually, because otherwise all that material advancement is just used to like build weapons of war and stuff. And so, that was also like a very, very significant part of his ministry. He also ensured that the Bab was finally buried on the mountain of Haifa, and that his shrine was built, or like an initial structure for his shrine. It's honestly the perfect location for a shrine. Nowadays there's this beautiful building that's been built, and like there's terraces going all the way up to the top of the mountain and all the way down. So that was started by him as well. He also helped guide many of the believers in Persia, now Iran, which were, going through persecution, but they were slowly multiplying their numbers, and they started, even in these very, very early days, they started establishing like schools for girls, because like girls were like not treated very well in the country, and many of them were illiterate. They started efforts to eliminate illiteracy in their own community. And that was under his direction as well. He interpreted many of the teachings, so he was authorized as an interpreter, someone who could explain the meaning of different passages. just so that differences wouldn't arise again, to keep people united. Um, he was almost banished to northern Africa because like enemies of the Baha'i faith had sent letters to like the Sultan of the Ottoman Empire, trying to get like Abdul Baha arrested and deported. And so he withstood all of that. What happened during his life is incredible. And not only that, we as Baha'is also see him as kind of a role model for like how we should act ourselves. He was in many ways an exemplar of Baha'i life and of Baha'i teachings. He fed the poor, he served everyone constantly, he was always joyful, he only saw the good in people and he never saw the bad. And even his own title, Abdul Baha, in Arabic, it means the servant of Baha. So that was the only title he wanted. Baha'u'llah had called him like the mystery of God, or like, the most mighty branch, branch referring to like a son of Baha'u'llah.
Yeah.
And he said like, well, Baha'u'llah made me the interpreter of the teaching. So I interpret all of these to mean the servant of Baha. That's the only thing I want to be called. I don't want to be remembered as this like great guy. I just want to the way he dressed and the way he spoke were like, indicative of being like a lowly servant when compared to Baha'u'llah. And he said that the station of man is one of servitude to God. We shouldn't like claim the station of like prophethood or greatness or anything. We should just claim servitude, and in the end, that is the ultimate joy of living life.
Well, it's really good. He had a good relationship with his father.
Yeah, they had.
He could have just scraped everything and started anew.
They were he was the relationship between Baha'u'llah and Abdul Baha is something that people who would see them together, they would have a very, very hard time even like fully comprehending what was going on between the two. There was an episode where Baha'u'llah, he disappeared for 2 years. This was before he declared himself, but he disappeared for 2 years, and he was wandering around in the mountains as a dervish, as just a kind of and he lived more of a nomadic lifestyle. And then when he finally came back to modern day Iraq, where they were banished at the time, there's this story that like when Abdul Baha and the Baha'u'llah saw each other, it was so moving that like people were so amazed at the bond between the two.
Well, am I right? Like many people during his 2-year disappearance, like many people, his friends and family were telling him like they wanted him back, but he refused, and it was his son that wrote him a letter, and that's what made him come back.
Maybe I don't remember exactly what the
that's
situations are. It also took them a very long time to contact him. Mm-hmm. I don't remember exactly what it is, but it's you might be right.
I believe it was his son. Yeah, it was his son that actually wrote him, and he was Baha'u'llah was so moved by his son's letter. He's like, you know what, this is my son. I need to go back now.
Wow, you know more than me apparently.
Well, no, I'm sure I don't. Just a little bit here and there.
Yeah.
But yeah, because his wife couldn't even get him to come back, but his son did. So
wow.
But yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Now, what was I going to say? So his grandson. Now here's the thing. I've heard a criticism that his grandson like deviated from the teachings. How do you feel about that? Is that true, or was he?
No, it's not true.
He was in alignment with
in every single way that you could look at it. I would say that basically in every single case, I don't think I can think of a single example in which he deviated from the teachings. I think he is the ultimate example of just, steadfastness in faith in Baha'u'llah, and in just, abiding by his teachings and by explaining them and expounding on them. Mm-hmm. I think sometimes people might get a little bit confused when they see that, like, the Baha'i faith, maybe Baha'is do things differently now than they used to. And people are thinking, well, maybe, they might bring up a letter from Baha'u'llah where Baha'u'llah wrote to the believers and he said, do this. And then Abdul Baha wrote to them and said, actually now do this. It's not a difference in teaching. It's like a difference in, difference in strategy, kind of a difference in how to operate. I'd be curious to know what they're exactly referring to. It's probably like maybe a kind of misunderstanding, but I think in everything you would have to do a lot of effort to find something that even sounds like a deviation from the teachings.
Well,
I
it
think.
was Rob. You remember this? It was somebody from a different, actually a different faith that had looked into Bahá'ísm and said that like, oh, there's some deviation. But I don't know enough about it to say
I got
otherwise. But yeah, so that's why I wanted to ask.
Yeah.
But you know what I really like about Baha'u'llah and his son is that when these new spiritualities pop up, you know, whether it's, you know, Raelianism or TM, Transcendental Meditation, there's a lot of scandal in these religions, but you don't really see that in Baha'i faith. There was no real scandal with Baha'u'llah, like accusations that he was grooming anybody or things like that.
Right.
Because I've actually looked into that, and like, no, his son Abdul Baha, no accusations of anything. So like they were like really like stand up guys.
I'll be totally honest. For people who follow like religions, where like there's different scandals going on.
Mm-hmm.
I honestly don't know how they do it. I'll be honest. I'm just it kind of I guess I just feel so lucky that I get to it just makes it just like it's kind of it's honestly amazing. And for me, if anything, it's just another sign that like maybe there's maybe there is some like some hope, because like the world is in such a terrible state right now. You've got lots of conflicts going on, lots of poverty, and like lots of you've got all the climate change going on, and just the world is in like a terrible condition. And I think so many people are just like losing hope in the world, losing faith, and people are becoming more complicit. People are like less interested in what's going on. They're just like corruption in politics, like whatever, I'm just used to that. I think I think it just gives me more and more hope that like the teachings of Baha'u'llah can just like shine through as like a light in the darkness. The fact that despite all of this, Baha'is, and Baha'is, they make mistakes and stuff, and plenty of people will do things. None of us are perfect. I'm not perfect. I've made mistakes. I've probably made mistakes in this podcast. I don't know. But it just goes to show that like the fact that there is this spirit, this spirit among Baha'is, and that they've been able to carry this religion as far as they have, so well. One of the most interesting periods in Baha'i history, I think, is the death of Shoghi Effendi, because when he died, he, unlike Abdul Baha and Baha'u'llah, he didn't have a will and testament. He didn't have a successor or anything, and so Baha'is were kind of confused, like what do we do? And so they studied the writings, and they were like, he had these plans for the Baha'i faith all the way up until 1963, which is actually the centenary, actually exactly 100 years after the declaration of Baha'u'llah, which is kind of cool. So they were like, okay, so after all of that's over, and Shoghi Effendi, he talks so much about the Universal House of Justice, so they're like, okay, after that, we should elect the Universal House of Justice, because, and just, and they made it one of the objectives of the plan that would continue until 1963. And there were these Baha'is called the Hands of the Cause, and they were appointed by Shoghi Effendi, and he called them the chief stewards of Baha'u'llah's embryonic world commonwealth. And so a steward is basically the guy on the ship who, if the captain dies, he takes over. So they realized, what this means is that we are meant to take over until the Universal House of Justice is established. And so, all of them together as one unified body, they didn't deviate at all from Shoghi Effendi's instructions, and they, worked to establish the Baha'i faith around the world. what you need to know about the Universal House of Justice is that it is elected by all the members of the national governing bodies known as National Spiritual Assemblies. So you have local spiritual assemblies, which are 9-member bodies, national spiritual assemblies, which are also 9-member bodies, and then the Universal House of Justice governs them all. And the Universal House of Justice is elected by the national spiritual assemblies. When Shoghi Effendi died, there were 26 national assemblies. This was in 1957. In 1963, there were 56 national assemblies. So that was an increase of 30.
Yeah.
And this was because of like all the efforts to spread the faith around the world and to grow Baha'i communities. And so because they stayed firm in the will of Shoghi Effendi, they were able to basically preserve the faith in this, this moment of like, this moment of like crisis basically. And they were able to elect the Universal House of Justice. And now, that has continued to this day. The Universal House of Justice still exists. And so, and like you look even further back, you look at like Baha'is who would basically give their whole lives for the faith. Basically, the authorities in Persia and other countries where they persecuted the Baha'is, they would basically take them and they would say, either you recant your faith or you die. If you recant your faith, you'll be fine. We'll let you go, whatever. And they didn't. They were like, no, I want to stay steadfast in the faith of God, even if it means that my own life is taken. So, despite the fact that we're all human and we all have shortcomings, I'm just so impressed by the level of faith and the level of devotion that Baha'is have shown throughout Baha'i history, and it's very encouraging. And I really hope that, I hope that I can also to some degree also show some of these qualities. I'm working on myself. I don't think I'm perfect, but I also just hope that we as Baha'is will continue to have this legacy that we've been able to build over the first 180 years of our existence.
Yeah, I think it's a testament to like what the religion tries to spread, because the Baha'i faith really focuses on human nature, and as opposed to all these like strict dogma that you see in other religions. It's really about like bringing the people together and not worrying about the little things. And Baha'u'llah didn't really make things about himself. He made things about he looked at the grander picture, about building a world community and bringing everybody together. So I think that's why it works out, because it speaks to a lot of people. Everybody wants to help somebody else out, instead of just, this constant, worship.
Yeah, it's, I would say like a lot of the prophets of the past did this as well. It wasn't about themselves. It was about the new teachings and stuff. There's one passage from the writings of Baha'u'llah where he says that he has consented to be bound in chains and fetters, to be like thrown into prison, so that mankind might be liberated from spiritually from things that have held it back, and that he was forced and he was willing to consent to have abasement heaped on him and all kinds of indignities and people mocking him, so that humanity as a whole would be exalted and glorified. So it's like he's basically his life of suffering is kind of almost meant to like liberate humanity, kind of, which is a very interesting concept. It's something to really like meditate about,
Yeah, when reading about Baha'u'llah's life and his suffering, it really reminded me of the suffering that Christ went through.
Yeah, exactly.
As well.
It's the same thing every time. Literally, like a messenger will come, Christ, Muhammad, Moses, Buddha, all of them. They come, and people who are living at that time, they don't recognize him, right? And they say, no, you're different from the scriptures of the past. How could you possibly be a messenger? They did this to Baha'u'llah. They did this to the Bab. They would they would mock them, and they would do all kinds of things to them. Christ was crucified, and Muhammad was forced to flee his home city, and eventually had to and eventually had to establish a new community somewhere else along, and basically flee through the desert and hide in caves and stuff. The Bab, tens of thousands of his followers were murdered, and he was executed himself. Baha'u'llah was imprisoned and exiled 4 times from Persia all
Tortured,
the way. Yeah, and both the Bab and Baha'u'llah were tortured as well. And so, it's something that you see every single time, and it's so mysterious. It's like, if these figures are if they're so great, how is it possible that people will deny them, right?
Mm-hmm.
And there's a few explanations. I've heard some people say that it's like reading a book and like having it like right on your face. You can't see any of the words. So at the same way, like you have to pull the book away, and then you can actually like read what's on there. So people who are like so close to Baha'u'llah, they'll say like, oh, he's just a man. He doesn't look different to us. He looks like us. He talks like us. He walks like us. There's no difference. But if we look at his whole life, and if we look at the impacts that he's had, and if we look beyond the material to the spiritual, it shows, a totally different person from anything that like it's he's not even a person. It's a messenger of God, right? Another explanation is that Baha'u'llah or Christ or Muhammad, they could come, and their power is such that they could just, with one word, just have everyone like come and follow them and be their followers. But they don't do that because they respect human nature and they respect free will. I think you would agree that like if, say, Baha'u'llah was to descend from the clouds and like, perform miracles all the time, that would kind of like subvert people's free will and basically like coerce them into being a follower, right? So instead he dresses up in like human clothing basically, and he will never do anything that will convince someone else to become a follower, right?
Yeah.
So miracles in the Baha'i faith are extremely limited, and often we don't really like consider them to be that kind of. We'll just say that they're like unexplainable events that happened in the Baha'i faith, and they do this just so that only people who believe in Baha'u'llah will actually be able to like will actually be able to derive something spiritual from being in his presence, right? Everyone has the right to deny the prophet, which is such an interesting concept to me. It's I don't know if I'm doing it justice, but it's something that like it's another mystery in the Baha'i faith.
For sure.
No one can claim to have understood everything, right?
Yeah. No, that's a really good point actually. That like, he was human, and I'm sure he made mistakes as well, but it was about his life and everything he went through.
Yeah, it's not so much about mistakes either. For example, like when there's the story of when his wife died, he was he talks about how there was one part of him which is like the manifestation of God, the spiritual part, which knew that like she had lived a good life, and she was in the next world, and she was so happy, and so he knew all of this. But at the same time, there was another part of him, this human part that he had, this human clothing that he had put on, that felt an enormous amount of grief, human grief. So there's this idea that like it's human to feel grief, but at the same time we know that people who die, it's also like they've gone to another world, a world that is so much more than this physical world that we are in. It's the spiritual world.
Rob, you've done some research. Do you have any questions?
I don't know if you'll know about this one, but when Jack and I were leaving the bookstore at the temple, we saw a book about Seventh-day Adventism, and we weren't quite sure what that was about, so we looked it up later on. And I guess there's a lot to it, but like Seventh-day Adventism was a consequence of like the Millerite movement. So they believed that the prophet was going to come in 1844?
Yeah.
And that's when we realized the book was about the Bahá'í. appearing? 'Cause that was
The Bab
1844,
appearing,
right?
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so he appeared in 1844. So there were many Christian philosophers who were like, trying to date the exact time of like the second coming of Christ. And many of them narrowed it down to like 1843, 1845, roughly in that ballpark. Muslims themselves were also waiting for like, I don't know much about Sunni Islam, but I know that Shia Muslims were awaiting for the return of the 12th Imam, Imam Ali, and the Bab. Actually, his name is like Sayyid Ali Muhammad, so there's Ali in his name. And so they dated that to the year 1260 in the Islamic calendar, which also corresponds to 1844. So there were also these prophecies. People were like waiting for it was a very, very big deal. People were like expecting like Christ would like descend from the heavens and bring hell to all the non-believers and bring all the believers to heaven. And it was such a big deal and it was known as the Great Disappointment, I think, when like people were like, oh, it's like nothing happened,
Sorry, could you talk a little closer?
Oh, sorry, yeah. So like people were like, what? Nothing happened, and so, but what really happened was Baha'u'llah, the Bab before Baha'u'llah in 1844 had declared himself to be a new prophet, and very soon in Persia there would be a huge movement of like people converting and lots of violence and violence as a result of the clergy and the government trying to repress them, and there were many like newspapers or many like ambassadors of Europe who were living in Persia who like wrote about this and reported it to like the Western world, but no one made the connection that it was actually like maybe that like the Bab declaring was the same date as what they had been waiting for.
So
right?
do you think that's what it was?
I mean, I don't know too much about it. Like,
okay,
the Bab and Baha'u'llah also have like different stations. So I'm not sure whether it's exact. I don't remember exactly whether it's like the Bab who's like the second coming of Christ or more Baha'u'llah. And there's different prophecies regarding from different religions. We say that like what is it? Hindus are waiting for the 10th avatar. Buddhists are waiting for the 5th Buddha. Jews are waiting for the Messiah. I think many of these terms are applicable to Baha'u'llah, but the ministry of the Bab is honestly like so mysterious and so incredible. I don't know, like, it's something that's definitely worth researching, but there is this connection between these prophecies that the Christians and the Muslims were waiting for, and there's a fantastic book on it. It's called Thief in the Night by William Sears, and he lays it out very, very beautifully, the story of these prophecies and the coming of Baha'u'llah, and he explains it very, very well, much better than I could.
Baha'u'llah is so quotable. Like Rob and I have talked about this, where like you're in the temple and there's all these quotes by him, or you read up on him in books or online, and he's just, everything he says is just so quotable.
Yeah, it's. I think that's another part of him, right? Like that.
He's a poet.
Yeah, he's a, but it's also like the words, his writings aren't meant to be that like only intellectuals can understand it.
Yeah.
That's another difference between the Baha'i faith and religions of the past, which is that in the past, only certain individuals who belongs to a clergy could read the Holy Scripture, and they would explain its meaning to individuals. But now that literacy rates are like 90% or something, now the Baha'i faith doesn't have any clergy of any kind, and that it's up to us as individuals to read the writings for ourselves and come to our own conclusions, basically, and to try to understand them for ourselves, and not be basically rely on a clergy in that way. So that's another thing about him, and I think Baha'u'llah's writings, and the fact that so many of them are translated into English now and in so many other languages, I think is another part of that.
When you look at charts and statistics for world religions, the Baha'i faith is growing, and you being in the temple and working there, where do you see the Baha'i faith in the future?
In the future, oh my God. Well, no one really knows exactly what the future will look like. But I think that I see Baha'is getting more and more involved in social and economic development. I see them, you know, building more Baha'i temples. Ever since 2012, they've, started building just more and more of them. The Universal House of Justice said that like now was a time that they would also start building temples in communities where like, where like the number of Baha'is had like, and the size of the community had really grown to that level. So from 2012, the number of temples has increased from 7 to 14, and there's like one more under construction and many more planned. So you can see a lot more of this kind of translation of the writings into actually reality and action.
Mm-hmm.
So that's one element of it. I think we'll also see like the strengthening of Baha'i institutions and their ability to facilitate what goes on in the Baha'i world, and that more and more people will turn to them, like local assemblies and national assemblies, as and that these assemblies won't just like serve the Baha'is, but they'll also serve the people. There's some stories, some new breaking stories about some communities where like there was like issues about food insecurity, and people were turning to the local assembly asking them, hey, we have this problem, do you think you could like help us out? So that's another very, very special thing. I think it looks different in different places.
Mm-hmm.
I think that like here in America there'll probably be a lot of efforts to try and curb try to stop like racial prejudice, and to basically try to overcome like systemic racism, those kinds of things. In India, in some communities, you're starting to see like, have you ever heard of the caste system?
Yeah.
That's starting to erode in some communities, or like women are starting to serve as more than just being like child rearers and like
Mm-hmm.
women of like the household. So those kinds of things. And I think like the Baha'i World Center will further develop. Right now they're actually building a shrine for Abdul Baha,
Oh, nice.
which it's another incredible building.
Where's that at?
It's close to the shrine of Baha'u'llah, right by Akka.
Okay.
And so, that's another very, very special development. And it's an incredible building. So if you should look it up. It's like,
for sure.
it's not like a grand building. It's kind of more of a symbol of his humility and his servitude.
Yeah.
The idea that he was like a servant, and but it's still like a shrine built in his honor. So it's a very interesting concept. It's a very unique building. But at the end of the day, no one knows what the future of the Baha'i community will be. You look back to like what Baha'is used to talk about earlier, and it's like they believe that like the Universal House of Justice would be established in 1920,
Mm-hmm.
or like or like there would be, the Baha'is would have achieved world peace by 2000 or something.
Yeah.
So people they believe things that may not have been entirely correct, but I do think that for me personally, I do believe that the next few decades, with everything that I'm seeing, they might genuinely be some of the toughest decades that humanity might ever experience. I think that there will be, many, many tragedies and, many horrible things happening in the world. And it's, it's starting now, but like it's going to get much worse with climate change and wars. There could be like another world war on the horizon, right?
Mm-hmm. But
at the same time, I really hope that the Baha'i community is now large enough that it can kind of stand as a beacon of light in opposition to that, That's my ultimate hope for the Baha'i community in the future.
Yeah, because they do a lot of like not only national outreach but international outreach as well.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of that going on.
Yeah.
You work at the Baha'i Temple, and you do a lot of events there. So is there any upcoming events that you wanna promote or?
Upcoming events? Not so much. I would say, to anyone who wants to visit the temple, you're more than welcome to. It's open to everyone. It's not just a temple for Baha'is. It's open to people from all backgrounds, from 6 a.m. until 6 p.m. So please feel free to come around and visit. If there might be some Baha'i activities going on. There are some Baha'i activities going on in Chicago, possibly near you. So even if you're like not a Baha'i, it's still like, I would, it would be really nice to like, I think that, these materials which are inspired by the Baha'i faith, they are, meant for the spiritual and material progress of communities, so it's something to really think about, and it's something, Baha'is are just like starting to work here in Chicago. It's only really been going on for some 10 years, and
Right.
very few people are involved, but you're already starting to get, see people be like transformed and start to be so much more involved in serving their community. So that's also really special.
Yeah, it's rapidly
so
growing.
The
and-
main thing, like, that I would promote so much would be the Ruhi Institute and the materials that they make.
The what
they're-
institute?
The Ruhi Institute, RUHI.
What's
Their
that?
materials are free to download, so you can check them out as well. And they're basically this institute that makes these materials for the, the spiritual improvement of communities based on the Baha'i writings. And they've been developing their materials for several decades now. And they have they have like a sequence of courses that talks about, that basically is about like training people to
Mhm.
perform like over time just more and more acts of service that are in conformity with the Baha'i teachings, and with a way that has been proven to be effective for the development of communities in all kinds of ways. There's materials that talk about hosting classes for spiritual education of children, or a junior youth spiritual empowerment program. Junior youth refers to children aged 12 to 15. They're not
Mhm.
really children anymore. Hosting devotionals and devotional programs to bring communities together. This idea of worship and service coming together and essentially being one coherent thing. So that would be, if there's
And there's a lot of presentations that go on at the temple too.
yeah, sometimes there are presentations that go on as well. Every Friday there's like a fireside. Every Friday evening there's a fireside that goes on where the people just talk about the faith. So that's another good place to learn about it a bit more. That's like a little bit after the temple is closed, but it's still that's another way to learn about what goes on. What the whole deal is with the Baha'i faith,
Well, look, I'll definitely be going more soon.
Yeah.
And it was awesome to
appreciate
meet
that.
you, and thank you for coming on. This was fantastic. And
Yeah, thanks for
yeah,
having me.
yeah, for sure. So we'll see more of each other. And for those of you listening, check out the Baha'i Temple in Wilmette, Illinois. I mean, you can't miss it. When you go past it, it's huge. It's just very pristine. It's beautiful.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, thanks, Billy, for coming on.
No problem. Thanks for having me.
Yeah.
I appreciate it very much.